Hi everyone, I'm Jennifer Morrison. Today I'm going to show you how I drew these lemons using colored pencils blended with solvent. So for this drawing I used Utrecht NOOD No Odor Paint Thinner. It dissolves the pencil pigment and gets rid of any graininess from your pencil so that your final drawing will look more like a painting. So before you blend with paint thinner, you're going to need to make sure you have a solid base of colored pencil. For this drawing, I used a combination of several different brands, including Prismacolor, Polychromos, Derwent Lightfast, and Holbein colored pencils. Different pencil brands deposit different amounts of pigment per layer, so rather than worry about the number of layers of pencil, I just watch to see that there is plenty of pigment on the paper before I blend with the paint thinner. I like to use a stiff bristled brush to really ground down the pencil pigment. No floppy brushes here. After I blend with paint thinner, I let the drawing rest for a few minutes to make sure the paper is really dry before I add my second layers of pencil. Because I use such a small amount of paint thinner on my brush, the paper is never exactly wet, but I want it to be completely dry before I start drawing. Moving on to the leaf, I am again adding many layers of colored pencil to the drawing. Anytime I draw leaves, I like to start by indenting the paper in places where the veins should be. Then I can come back over with lighter layers of pencil and the pigment won't stick in these areas, making the veins nice and prominent. Blending over these areas with paint thinner will tone them down some, making them appear more natural. And once again, I am blending with the paint thinner. Look how nice and blended this looks. After the paper had dried, I decided to use an electric eraser to pull up some of the pigment to create some extra texture on this leaf. This is another technique that I like to use in my drawings. Then I use my pencils to darken the shadows, brighten the highlights, and add any details that I might want on the leaf. Here is one more example, a little slower this time. I start by outlining the leaf and then indenting the veins. Next, I use a really dark green or black to block in the shadows. I am using a very light pressure at this point. I use a white pencil to protect the brighter areas of the leaf, and then I add several different shades of green. I work right over the shadows and the highlights, combining all of the colors together. You will notice that while this is beginning to look a lot like a leaf, the pencil pigment is still very grainy. When I am ready to blend, I dip the tip of the paintbrush into the paint thinner and then dab it on a washcloth to get rid of any excess. The paintbrush should be damp but not wet, especially when you are first starting out. For certain techniques, I might use more paint thinner on my brush, but when you are simply dissolving the pigment, it doesn't take much. Since I am working with one color family here, I can blend over the entire thing with no worries. If I were blending something that had more than one color, I might want to clean the brush off between colors if I didn't want them to mix. Take your time and make sure you don't go outside the lines of the leaf. This will stain the white of the paper if you go outside the lines, and I know from experience that you won't be able to erase it. Here is a close-up view, and here are a few more tips. I like to decant a small amount of paint thinner into a separate jar so that it stays nice and fresh. Over time, a sediment can form in the paint thinner if you don't do this. Second, I found that a washcloth works best for drying off my brush. And be sure to put the cap back on and wash your hands after you have used this product. This is just safe practice. And here I'm adding my second layers to this leaf. I usually go back over using the same series of pencils that I used in the first layers. This is the time to darken the shadows, brighten the highlights, adjust the colors, add texture, sharpen the edges, and add any final details. And this is a process that I repeat over and over until my drawing is done. I use my reference image as a guide and draw what I see. As you can probably tell, I have such a passion for drawing with colored pencils and using paint thinner as a blending tool. Using paint thinner with my colored pencils has transformed the way I draw over the years and has become a huge part of my process. Try it for yourself and you will see why I call it magic. And here is my final piece. I hope this video has inspired you to get some colored pencils and some paint thinner and give this technique a try. Thanks for watching.